What's going on, guys? Graham Giacomatthews here, back on the channel to give my 2 cents on the Andre the Giant documentary that aired this past week on HBO. Just got done checking it out a few days ago, a few days after the fact. It did air back on April 10th originally. You can find it online if you don't have HBO. It's well worth checking out. It had been previously heavily hyped up by WWE dating back to the Rumble, so sparking my interest, the interest of a lot of people. Like, I went to a conference of sorts a few weeks back with people that are not wrestling fans at the college that I graduated from about a year ago. And even they were talking about knowing that I'm a wrestling fan. They were asking me, are you looking forward to the Andre documentary, blah, blah, blah. Like, a lot of people have been talking about it, which is cool. So WWE and HBO and everyone involved in the project has done a great job of promoting it. Though I didn't see a lot of people talking about it after the fact on Tuesday, which was weird. I saw a few people tweeting about it after SmackDown, because that's when it aired on HBO. But it definitely did not receive the same, in my opinion, based off what I saw, received the same feedback that like the Ric Flair documentary did late last year, that 30 for 30. And this is a lot like that. It's very similar in format if you've never seen the HBO documentaries. But I thought this was great. A lot of it, most wrestling fans probably already know about Andre's background and what he was diagnosed with, why he's so giant, why he is Andre the Giant and all this other stuff. But some minute details about his upbringing and stuff like that. Stuff I did not know, which I found to be very, very interesting growing up in France. He knew from the get-go that he did not want to be a farm boy growing up on a farm and doing that for the rest of his life. He knew that was something he did not want to do, and he wanted to be different. So I guess he was doing something else. I think he was doing some sort of other sport, and he was training with the wrestling team. And he filled in for someone one day, despite what he said. He was like, oh, I don't want to go. I'm not a wrestler. And they're like, oh, you're great. Come on, fill in. And he took to it like a duck to water. And he got really, really good. And that's obviously how he broke into the business later on with his background in wrestling in high school. And that was around the time he started to, like, he wasn't a giant baby. Like, he wasn't until, like, he was 14, 15, 16 that he really started to grow. And we get a lot of great interviews from not only the obvious suspects like Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon, but also his family, his brothers and his sister-in-law and all these other people that are still alive, talking about Andre's upbringing and how hard it was for him to feel comfortable, even before he broke into wrestling. But yeah, we kind of get the upbringing of Andre in addition to the career retrospective, how he got into the business, and how that later led him to WWE and Vince McMahon's father, Vincent J. McMahon, and all this other stuff. But in addition to the look at Andre's career, we also get this great kind of inside story. And not really inside story, it's more of just a recap. And again, if you're a wrestling fan, a longtime wrestling fan, and a knowledgeable one at that, then you probably already know the story of how Vince, bought up all the territories, really created a pro wrestling monopoly with WWE. And we kind of get a quick recap of that because you kind of have to know the backstory of how WWE came to be before you could truly understand Andre's impact, not only on WWE, but pro wrestling in general. And they talk about Hulk Hogan, and obviously Hogan's involved in the project, despite the controversy that it was involved in a few years ago. But this, I think, was Hogan's first public appearance of any sort in a project like this since that whole thing happened a few years back, which was cool to see. And obviously, you can't do a documentary on Andre the Giant without bringing in Hulk Hogan. And there was a lot of Hogan in this thing. It wasn't like a one-and-done type deal where he had one thing to say about Andre. He was in this thing quite a few times, especially in the latter half, when they were talking about their, obvious feud leading into WrestleMania 3. And something that I didn't know, that I probably should have known before, watching this thing, was that Hogan and Andre, in fact, had a lot of matches before the WrestleMania 3 match. They had a lot of matches not only as tag team partners, but also down in Florida, in the Northeast, on non-televised shows, obviously. But everyone involved in the documentary, Mean Gene Okerlund, Hulk Hogan, Vince McMahon, they were all saying, like, whatever happened before WrestleMania 3 didn't happen, because they wanted to make this thing feel like the biggest deal possible. So this was, in WWE's eyes, the first ever clash of Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant one-on-one. In reality, it wasn't. They had already worked together many, many times prior to that point. And what's crazy is that by this point, and they made it pretty clear too, which is weird, that Andre had told Vince in secrecy, whatever, in privacy, that his body was breaking down. Andre was a guy that he could have had many operations and probably could have lived longer than he did. He only died at like 43 in his early 40s, which is pretty crazy. But he was a guy, they had made it pretty clear that he didn't want to get the surgeries. He didn't want to get the operations, even though it could have allowed him to live longer, despite the fact he was extremely uncomfortable later on in his life, that he didn't want to get the operations. He just didn't care. But because of that, he was hurting quite a bit at the end of his wrestling career in the mid-'80s, late 80s, early 90s. I forgot when he officially retired. It might have been in the early 90s, because I remember him being at WrestleMania 6, and that was when he turned babyface, and that was in 1990. So he at least wrestled until the early 90s, right before his passing in January of 1993. But anyway, he had told Vince McMahon before WrestleMania 3 that I'm hurting bad, dude. Like, I know I'm done, not only in the ring, but like my life is quickly coming to an end here. And despite the fact that he had said that, Vince McMahon went ahead and put him in a money match with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 3, which is pretty crazy. I mean, obviously, Andre wanted to go through with it, because if he didn't, then obviously he wouldn't have done the match. If he was like on the verge of death, he would not die for another few more years. But it is pretty crazy that despite the fact he had well known, Vince that is, that Andre was on his last legs, almost literally here, they went about doing the match, because he knew it would be a money match. Andre knew it would be a money match, and Hogan also knew it would be a money match. And for fans worldwide, especially for kids that didn't know it was fake and all this other shit, it's like, it's kind of crazy to wrap your head around. Like, we all remember it and being this iconic clash many, many years back, but you got to put yourself in the moment. I wasn't even born yet. For those that were, though, watching wrestling at the time, it was like this unforeseen, unprecedented matchup where it's like you have this guy who has never been beaten before on WWE TV, at least by pinfall or submission, that being Andre the Giant, and then Hulk Hogan, who had been on a World's Champion for several years by that point. So you have this meeting of two guys that had been at the, in storyline at the top of their game. Really, in reality, Andre was on his way out. The guy was he could barely even walk at that point. He had broken his ankle, and for him, that was a huge thing. For many other people, obviously, it would be, a step in just a minor roadblock in your career. But with Andre, because the guy was so big, he didn't want to have surgery. It took a little longer to heal. He was already breaking down by that point, and he had many other injuries that he was dealing with. So obviously, we all know the body slam. We all know the leg drop. But if you really go back and watch the match in full, it's not a good match. To be quite honest, the match sucks. Because Andre, the whole match was about working to his limitations. Because they knew that his body was beat up. And there was only so much he could do. Dave Meltzer, who was also heavily involved in this documentary, which was cool to see, talked about Andre. They knew that it was only appropriate for him to put over Hogan on the way out and all this other stuff. But he was really, really beat up. Like, you probably already knew that. I knew that before watching this doc. But they really emphasized that this guy was hurting. He was dying. Like, he knew that he was dying, but they went forth and doing the match anyway. And he went on to wrestle later on, well after that, having a rematch at WrestleMania 4. He was in action at WrestleMania 5, and he was at WrestleMania 6. I think he wrestled at WrestleMania 5, but he went on to wrestle for a few more years after that, despite the fact his body was in terrible shape. And the guy couldn't compete at all, but he's still an attraction. People loved Andre. They even mentioned the fact that despite the fact he was a heel, he didn't really want to be a heel. Because he enjoyed being a babyface and getting that positive attention from people in public, as opposed to being like shamed by people who didn't really know it was fake yet. So it's not like today when you see a heel, you're gonna like boo, like fuck you. Like, that's what it was back then. That's what it was like back then, because people didn't really know the difference between real and scripted and fake and whatever. So he didn't really like that. So we knew he was on his way out. And apparently, based off what Vince had said in the documentary, which I had no idea about, that him and Andre really weren't on the best of terms before the end of Andre's life, which was crazy to hear about. But they talk about with Vince and Andre knew that he was done. So he would go on to wrestle one of his final few matches, and in leaving, Vince was kind of getting rid of him because he didn't really have a use for him at that point, but Andre felt betrayed, thinking that, oh, you don't really need me anymore, and he felt that since he was dying, that he knew that Vince would move on without him, so he felt betrayed. He felt that Vince had essentially used him for his own benefit and then kind of kicked him to the curb, which he didn't really do. To an extent he did, but Andre, there really wasn't much more he could do anyway. But it hurt Andre knowing that the business would move on without him, even long after he was gone. So I guess him and Vince really weren't on the best of terms before Andre passed. Like, Vince even said, the person who put together this documentary asked Vince, like, do you remember the last conversation that you had with Andre before he died? Vince said first, he's like kind of unsure. He kind of hesitates. He goes, not specifically. And then he flat out says, no, I don't. I don't remember. And it's probably because they didn't talk at all before Andre died, which is really sad to hear. And obviously Vince, Andre meant a lot to him, and he kind of got choked up at the end there when he has any regrets about not, ending things on better terms and whatever. And he said that he was special and all this other stuff. And also, speaking of people that got choked up and who were special to Andre, we get a lot of interview time here in this documentary from Timmy White. If you remember him, an old referee of WWE's. He retired back in 02, 03 or whatever, in the infamous Hell in a Cell match between Triple H and I think Chris Jericho in 2002. He's been still involved on occasion with the company. I think he actually introduced the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal Trophy back at WrestleMania 30. I know he carried it into the arena. So he's obviously played a big part in Andre's life, but I didn't know what it was prior to watching this documentary. So they talk quite a bit about Timmy White being like the handler of sorts to Andre, and they really weren't in the best of terms at first, because Timmy White was kind of appointed to him as his manager, as his, not really manager, but his handler, and making him feel comfortable and all this other stuff. Eventually, Andre warmed up to him, and they became really, really good friends. Andre even demanded of Vince, I want him on the road with me. So Timmy White was with him pretty much all the time. And he even said, Timmy White was really heartbroken. You could see at the end of this documentary, when he's talking about Andre, he's like, he died alone in a hotel room in France by himself. Andre was already home to go to his father's funeral. By the time he made it back to France to kind of say goodbye to his dad, who was sick, he'd already died. And then Andre died soon after because he was still in France, and he was in a hotel room, and he had a massive heart attack, and he was by himself, and that was it. There was really no one else around, and I guess Timmy White was pretty heartbroken by the fact that he died alone in a hotel room, and that was it. And he kind of regrets not being able to be there for his final few days, moments, minutes, whatever. So that was pretty emotional to see. But again, overall, I thought this was a great documentary. They didn't really talk about the impact of Andre after that. It really just kind of talked about his family, which I don't think I've ever seen Andre's family before watching this documentary, which was cool to see. I thought they might show footage of him. They didn't really do a formal induction for him in the WWE Hall of Fame, but he was the inaugural inductee into the WWE Hall of Fame. They didn't really mention that, I don't think. And that was really about it. I thought we might hear from Big Show and people like that, the impact he's had on the business as one of the biggest giants, one of the greatest giants of all time. Or even the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal, which would later be implemented at WrestleMania 30. Nothing. We do hear a lot from his Princess Bride co-stars. They do talk a lot about that and his role in that movie towards the end of his life, and how he really could not do much, fighting scenes that they thought would be a strong suit. Everything else he was great at, but the fight scenes, which is interesting to hear. I had seen a bit of that in the previews and the teasers, but I didn't really know too much about it until I watched the documentary. And his co-stars were talking about the fact that I think there was one scene where the main actress, her name escapes me, but she had fallen from the sky or something, and Andre was supposed to catch her, but she was on ropes, or she was tied up the entire time or whatever, because Andre, so basically he had no weight in his arms whatsoever, because basically Andre was so hurt that he couldn't even hold her, he couldn't even catch her. And the fight scenes did not come off great because he was just so beat up and he couldn't really do anything with his bad back and all this other stuff, which was just, again, crazy to hear about. But it was really cool they included the Princess Bride stuff, because obviously that played a very big role for Andre in the pop culture scene. And a lot of people already knew Andre anyway, but his role in that movie kind of solidified him as a pop culture icon in the late 80s, early 90s, whatever. But again, they cover pretty much every aspect of Andre's life, and it doesn't really feel rushed at all. It's about an hour and 20 minutes, but the thing goes by like that, because they cover his upbringing, his career, the end of his career. The match with Hogan was pretty huge. Again, they talk a lot about that, the fact that Andre knew he had to do the right thing and put over Hogan on his way out, but he kind of messed with Hogan, he kind of messed with Vince, and not really telling him that he was going to do the job. And according to Hogan, who's a pretty big bullshitter, obviously, but he states in this documentary, he says, according to Hogan, that he didn't know the finish of the match until he got in the ring. Now, Hogan listed out every detail of the match. He wrote down on a legal pad what they're going to do, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't know for sure that Andre would go along with the script, so to speak. And it wasn't until the match started that Andre had gone along with it and did what he was supposed to do and what Hogan had laid out for him to do. with taking the leg drop and the 1-2-3. Hogan even thought he would kick out. He didn't know that he was going to kick out. Again, according to Hogan. Now, Hogan's a pretty big bullshitter, but so take that for what it's worth. But it was a pretty interesting story to hear Andre potentially sabotaging the ending of the match because he didn't want to put over Hogan. But again, that was never really the case. Hogan was worried that Andre wouldn't put him over, which sounds a lot like Hogan. But it would make sense that Andre would want to mess with Hogan a little bit and make him think that, oh, I'm going over, brother, not you. Blah, blah, blah. So it was a pretty cool story. The whole thing is very well told. You got a lot of cool interviews in there. Like I said, from Andre's family, from Hulk Hogan himself, who you have to include here. I don't care what your thoughts are on Hulk Hogan. You got to get Hulk Hogan involved in an Andre the Giant documentary. So it's cool to hear from him here. Dave Meltzer as well. And a number of other people, Mean Gene Okerlund, the Princess Pride co-stars, as I mentioned earlier. There's a few other people I'm sure I'm forgetting, but obviously Vince McMahon himself. But overall, I thought it was a great documentary. I'm surprised I have not seen more feedback on the thing. I saw a lot more feedback in the Ric Flair 30 for 30 from ESPN late last year. That kind of blew up the internet. The Andre one has been hyped up for months, which I don't think WWE advertised. I don't think at all. Maybe. I'm not sure. The Andre one, they've been pushing that hard on WWE TV and on pay-per-views and stuff like that, dating back to the Rumble. So I'm surprised it didn't get more of a reaction from like the mainstream audience or the wrestling fans, whatever. But I thought it was really, really good. So you can check it out again on HBO. There's other places online to watch it if you don't have HBO. Definitely go out of your way, seek it out. It's a great documentary to kind of learn more about Andre and some stuff you probably already knew and some other interesting facts you didn't know. But either way, the guy's a spectacle. He's an attraction. One of the best of all time, one of the best performers of all time. I don't think anyone's ever going to tell you that he's one of the best wrestlers of all time in the ring, but as an attraction, as a spectacle, as a pure sports entertainer, he is the epitome of what pro wrestling is all about. So it's great to hear all about Andre and everything about his life from beginning to end and how it all came to be. The legacy of Andre the Giant. So you guys can check that out. Definitely do so. Again, it's great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you for checking out the review. It's not often I do movie reviews, but I did want to give my 2 cents on the Andre the Giant documentary on HBO because I just watched it, and I thought it was really, really good and deserves some praise. So anyway, guys, thank you for checking out the show. Appreciate it. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video. All that stuff is amazingly appreciated. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.